Hello everyone and welcome back to Strangers and Pilgrims. We talked about Lot in chapter 19, we talked about Abraham and Abimelech in chapter 20, and now we start chapter 21 and the birth of Isaac. Of course, this is the promise now being fulfilled after 25 years. When God called Abraham the first time, he was 75 years old. Now when Isaac is born, he's 100 years old. And we saw the ups and downs, we saw like the patience of Abraham and Sarah, and then sometimes they were not very patient, and now at the end the promise is fulfilled. Isaac is born and he's a source of joy, he's a source of laughter. That's why they called him Isaac, laughter. And we saw that this laughter in the life of Abraham was actually laughter because of joy, not laughter because he did not believe, but because he was joyful in the fulfillment of the promise of God. It's a very beautiful thing to live until you see the promise fulfilled. After 25 years, after a long time, yes, God has His own time, but when He promises, He will fulfill the promise. Then, after Isaac is born, on the 8th day, he is circumcised. And Isaac is the first one to ever be circumcised when he was 8 days old. We saw before that Abraham was circumcised, in old age. He circumcised all the people in his house also. They were not young. But then Isaac is the first one that fulfills this circumcision covenant on the 8th day of his life. Here, Origen, the scholar, says something nice about the celebration that Abraham had when Isaac was born, or circumcised. For sons of this kind, there is a feast and great joy when they are weaned. For these who no longer need milk but strong meat, who by taking up their power have their senses exercised to the discerning of good or evil. So here he is saying that when Isaac was weaned, Abraham celebrated because Isaac is a source of joy to them. And he's a source of joy because he's a prefigurement, he's a symbol of the people of the Spirit. And you will see, we'll talk shortly about Ishmael being a symbol of people of the flesh. Some people live according to the flesh, some people live according to the Spirit. The people that live according to the Spirit, as we just heard from the scholar Origen, is that they are source of joy to everyone. Now the next thing that we hear in the life of Isaac is that Sarah sees him playing with Ishmael. When he grew up a little bit, he's still like a young kid, he's playing with Ishmael, like maybe in that time a teenager. And she sees that Ishmael, the only thing that the Bible says is that he was playing with him, but then St. Paul and the fathers of the church interpreted that as they were mocking him, or Ishmael was mocking him, or Ishmael was persecuting him. And this is like a very important point to talk about. So again, the scholar Origen talks about this. He says, but let us see what Paul understood in this play. What did St. Paul understand when the Bible said Ishmael was playing with Isaac? He said, and what angered Sarah? And why was Sarah angered if they were just playing together? Why would that anger Sarah? Already above in our spiritual exposition, we set Sarah in the place of virtue. So he said that Sarah, was a virtuous woman, and she also resembles the people of God in their righteousness. If therefore the flesh, which is Ishmael, so now we're talking symbolically about Isaac being the people of the Spirit, Ishmael being the people that live according to the flesh, who was born according to the flesh. And we talked about this before, that Ishmael was born according to the flesh, meaning he was born according to the normal way of how every kid is born. That Sarah thought about giving Hagar to Abraham to get married and have a baby. Isaac was not born according to the flesh because Sarah was already 90 years old, Abraham was 100 years old, so he was born by the promise of God. It was something not natural. Attracts, so how this one who was born according to the flesh attracts the spirit, which is Isaac, and deals with him with enticing deceitfulness. If it allures him with delights, if it mitigates him with pleasures, this kind of play of the flesh with the spirit especially offends Sarah. So here the scholar Origen is explaining this in a symbolic way, but it's very beautiful. He is saying, what did Sarah see when Isaac and Ishmael were playing? She saw that the works of the flesh are enticing, alluring the works of the spirit, or enticing the person not to live according to the spirit. So here Sarah, who represents virtue, and then he says, and Paul judges allurements of this kind to be the most bitter persecution. So here the persecution, again, the scholar Origen keeps on saying, and you therefore, O hearer of these words, do not suppose that alone is persecution whenever you are compelled by the madness of the pagans to sacrifice to idols. You know, at his time, there were a lot of pagan emperors, kings, that were persecuting Christians because they worship God. They wanted them to sacrifice for their idols. But if perhaps the pleasure of the flesh allures you, but he's saying to everyone, if the pleasures of the flesh allures you, attracts you, if the allurement of lust sports with you, flee these things as the greatest persecution if you are a child of virtue. You know, a beautiful saying by the scholar Origen. If consider the allurements of the wickedness, of evil, of the flesh, to be the most bitter persecution, something that you definitely need to escape from. So what did Sarah see? Again, if we are explaining this in a symbolic way, she saw, being a virtuous woman, like the people of virtue, she saw that I cannot leave my son to play with, or to be allured by the flesh, allured by the works of the flesh. Otherwise, it's going to corrupt him. So that's why she went to Abraham and said, this boy cannot inherit with Isaac. He has to leave him and his mother. So here, Sarah goes to Abraham and says that. Abraham did not like it. And he did not like it, of course, because, you know, at that time, maybe Ishmael is about, 16, 17 years old. And all this time, Ishmael was for 13 years, or 14, Ishmael was the only child that Abraham had. He's attracted to him, he loves him, he's his only child before Isaac. And now all of a sudden Sarah tells him, you have to send him away. He cannot live with us anymore. So Abraham did not like that. But then God intervenes and says to Abraham, listen to Sarah. Listen to Sarah in what she's saying to you, because this is the right thing. Again, if we are understanding this in a figurative way, like in a symbolic way, the sons of the Spirit cannot leave anything that's according to the flesh to sport with them, to allure them, to entice them. So this is a great lesson for us, that if there is anything that I see that I'm lenient with, that I'm leaving in my life, that's a source of enticement to me, to leave my spiritual way, be careful of it, because according to what we read from the scholar Origen, this is the biggest or the most bitter persecution. The most bitter persecution is not the persecution of violence, it's the persecution of the works of evil enticing me to leave the ways of the Spirit. So this is a big lesson from what happened between Ishmael and Isaac. Next time we will continue and see what Abraham did and how did he obey when God told him to listen to Sarah. So this is it for this time. We'll see you next time in Strangers and Pilgrims.